Well, today we're exploring a fascinating intersection of advanced science and unexplained phenomenon. Could some UAPs be using cutting-edge warp propulsion technology? Well, MUFON Canada has the latest research suggesting that this might be true, and it's changing the game for how we understand these mysterious objects. Joining me today is Chad Wansless, an engineering technologist and investigator with MUFON Canada, who has contributed to this groundbreaking study. Today, we'll unpack the science behind this warp field theory, analyze real UAP footage like the Aguadilla and the La Bruja videos, and discuss how these findings point to the possibility use of operational warp technology. From gravitational lensing to experimental testing ideas, this episode promises to challenge your perspective of physics, technology, and the unknown. So buckle up. I'm your host, Tony Sweet, and we're about to warp into an uncharted territory. Let's welcome MUFON Canada's own Chad Wansless to the show. Hey, Chad, how are you?
Good. How about you?
Well, first of all, did I get the last name wrong or right?
Almost. It's Wanless.
Wanless. Well,
Perfect.
There we go. That I wanted to make sure I say it right. Sweet's pretty easy to say, so. Well, I always tell people when they come on the show, most people in this industry that we're doing anything paranormal, we've probably had an experience. If it's seeing a ghost or seeing a UFO, maybe a Bigfoot while we're on a long walk in the woods. So I always have to ask, what was your experience?
Well, I am an experiencer. Growing up, I had a number of missing time episodes. Grew up in the 70s. I'm in my 50s. Missing time was not something that people knew about. I had all these periods where time would just skip or jump, and I wouldn't know why. And usually, or often, something weird was going on, like the windows were lit up like it was day in the middle of the night, or I'd see a UFO up in the sky, and then it was 5 o'clock, and then I get home. It's a 2-block walk, and I get home and it's 8 o'clock at night, and I had no clue, absolutely no clue what was going on. And it was the book Missing Time by Bud Hopkins.
Mm-hmm.
I wound up buying that after having a shock from seeing the first time I'd seen something like a gray alien on television. So I thought, this bothered me. I didn't know why. So I figured I'll go to the bookstore. So I go in there, I start looking through books, and I find Missing Time. And I thought, okay, this seems like a reasonable book. So I started reading it. And the first experiencer was describing, or back then they were called abductees.
Right.
He was describing how he was driving at night. His car stopped, I don't know, of its own accord. And then it was night, but it was bright as day. And I remembered an event from when I was 8 years old. When I woke up, it was bright as day, and my best friend at the time was sleeping over. So I woke him up. We went upstairs to watch Saturday morning cartoons. We turned on the television, and there was an off-air signal that said it was 2:30 in the morning. Weird. Okay, but and my friend said, "Oh, being the son of a dentist, he says, let's go brush our teeth." I'm like, okay. So we go to the bathroom. That window was pitch black. Every other window was as bright as day, but this one was pitch black, and I was confused by it. And so we come out, and now everything's black. And I'm like, except for the television. So I better go turn the TV off. So I go to turn the TV off, and the off-air signal has changed in color and time. And now it says it's 5:30 in the morning. So 3 hours had disappeared. Now, like I said, I remembered all these things growing up, but I didn't know what any of it meant. And then all of a sudden, seeing this book, this Missing Time, this gray on the cover, I was in absolute shock. I was not wanting to accept this. And I was like, this had to be my friend. It couldn't have been me. It had to have been my friend. It couldn't have been me. And I thought that, and I processed that for 2 solid weeks. And then I had the courage to read the next chapter. And the next chapter was a young lady describing how she was I believe, in the barn of her grandfather's farm.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly she was outside, and she had a cut on her abdomen, and her parents were like, "Where have you been? We've been looking for you. you've been gone for hours. And that's when I suddenly remembered when I was, I believe, 12 years old, when I was walking home from an after school event. And I was following two boys, and suddenly they just kind of wandered off and disappeared. And then my ankle was wet, and they're like, "What's what with my ankle?" So I pulled on my ankle, and I've got this inch and a half long cut,
Oh,
or
wow.
half inch cut
Right.
on the front of my ankle, and it's just gaping wound. It's half inch wide, half inch deep, perfect cut down all the way through the muscle to the cartilage in the ankle joint itself. And I have felt no pain whatsoever. And I'm like, this is really weird. So I get home. My parents are like, "Where have you been? You've been gone for hours." And that's when I realized, remembering that event from being triggered in that reading the book, this was me. It was happening to me, not my friend. And it shook me, and it shook my
I'm
world.
sure.
And I was absolutely dumbfounded, devastated, and I didn't want to acknowledge that this had been happening in my life. But the more research I did, the more of these events I had uncovered, and it was inescapable. I came to the conclusion that I was an abductee, and there was no choice in it for me.
Yeah.
There was no, well, it might be this, it might be that. No, it was clear I was an experiencer.
Well, let me ask you this, and I always find it curious. Many people that I've interviewed have talked about being abducted or an experiencer, and later coming to find out previous family members, like mothers, grandparents, have been experiencers too.
Yeah.
When did you? And we'll get to your theory, the reason you're here. But I'm actually you've got me embedded in this now.
Yeah.
When did you verbally say this to people, like, I feel like I've been abducted, or I feel like an experiencer, and how did they take it? And did somebody else come out and say, "Hey, I've experienced that too"?
It was weird. I had shared it with my siblings first. One was accepting, one wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I decided to share with my mother, and she was absolutely not accepting. She started out with, "I can tell something's bothering you. You know, you can tell me anything." So I told her, and she blew up at me. And I shut down from that point on. I never could tell my dad. I
Yeah.
never had that discussion with him. And the research does show that this does run in families.
Right.
Uh, I've dealt with other families where many cousins all know they've been having experiences. I know, I won't go into it with my family, but I know there's a couple who have also told me about their experiences. So
I find that so fascinating. Well, today I don't want to move on that quickly, but time does go quick. But you're here to talk about a theory that you've put together, exotic
yeah.
propulsion theory and evidence of operational warp drive propulsion found in UAP videos. And so, that being said, can you briefly explain to the audience listening and watching the purpose of this study and what inspired MUFON Canada to focus on warp propulsion in connection to UAP phenomenon?
Okay. Well, essentially what had happened was I had seen a video of a Saturn-shaped craft flying. It was recorded from an aircraft over South America. And as it was passing in front of the clouds, I noticed that the background clouds were momentarily changing
Hmm.
as it was flying by. Now, I work in engineering. I'm a mechanical designer. I've been doing this for 30 years. I'm trained my eye to catch anything that's out of the ordinary.
I was going to say, you
Um,
probably noticed these things.
I noticed it right away because in my profession, um, you have to notice things that are off, that are odd, that are out of place. Often I can tell something's wrong with a drawing or a model before I can tell what it was that was wrong. And you have to do that. You have to be really good at catching these things because things could get built wrong. There could be field rework. It's all costs money, or even worse, if you don't catch a design error, as not constructible, or even far worse, someone can get injured or killed if you don't catch a bad design that may be buildable but could cause an accident in a certain situation. So um, I'm a trained observer through my profession. And when I was watching the video, it caught my eye. And what I realized was there was something going on. Um, and I knew what gravitational lensing is. And so what I did is I started looking at other videos, looking for background changes as the objects were passing by. And sure enough, I found at least two or three more videos where background objects were being momentarily deformed as a UAP was passing by in front. And the one that showed the most number of these, what I call gravitational lensing events, and the clearest ones was actually the Aguadilla, Puerto Rico UAP event. And so that's the centerpiece for my paper that I wrote up. But to explain how that worked, I wrote in the paper about how as light passes a large object in space, let's see here. So as light passes a large object in space, the light will curve through the curved space and bend down towards in a different direction. And that's what I was noticing with the UAP, except it was coming underneath. The lights was coming up, bending up from underneath in most of the cases. And so that was good. And I had written up something. And then I wrote up a bit on how gravitational lensing works. If you're able to, there are a few example figures in the paper. Figures 4 shows a really good example of how the light bends going around the galaxy. Like Einstein discussed this in his papers in 1905 and I think 1915, and was proven using a photograph of an eclipse in 1919. So it's a real phenomenon. It's only been photographed at galactic scales, not at local macro scales. And that's what's so interesting about this is in these videos, you can actually see objects bending, like the roof line of one of the buildings in the Aguadilla video. It actually bends down as the UAP passes in front and then returns to its original shape after it passes. So it should be about 1 minute and 20 seconds in.
Let's see if we can find it. Oh, it's moving fast.
Yep. Yeah. But the interesting part is you really have to slow it down as it's passing in front of objects to be able to see it. You almost have to look at it on a frame by frame basis.
Oh, okay. So this is something that for people that are listening, we're playing the Aguadilla Puerto Rico video, and you can watch it on our YouTube channel. But so go ahead, and then we can.
So the first time you really see a good example of it is as it's passing in front of the airport tarmac. The lines on the tarmac are actually bending out of the way, both above and below. And then you see it come up here. It passes by so quickly you can't see it unless you actually are
like
stepping
slow
through
it down.
by frame. So if you press pause.
Let me see if I can press pause. Hold on. I don't think I can press pause here. Hold on. Let me see if I can pull it out. So we're 2 minutes in. So go ahead and keep talking, and I'll try to find it, and then I'll re-show it.
Okay. Yeah. If you can put it at 25% speed, that should show it. But it was right there as it was passing in front of those buildings. So yeah, I basically what I found was. Sure enough, everything was curving. And so the next step was, in my paper, I started writing, I gave examples. I had screen capture shots of individual still frames. And you could see the building slowly tilting more and more and then springing back. And then same with the lines.
Let me see if I can. Let's see if I can do this frame by frame here.
Yeah.
That is so cool just to watch this thing.
Yeah.
How fast do you think this thing's going?
The SCU, Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, calculated between 80 and 100 miles an hour or kilometers an hour. I can't remember which one it was. Yeah, stop right there. Now step forward a little bit.
Okay.
Keep going. All right, right there. One sec here. Yeah, step forward just a tiny bit. Yeah, you have to go back now. It's that roof line right there. Yeah, that one there. It's hard. You got to get in the right position.
Yeah, it's hard to.
It's only about 3 or 4 frames where it's actually bending the roof.
So you can actually see the bend in the video of the rooftop.
Yeah.
Got it. Wow. So there, I'm going to see if I can also find the picture. And you said it's in your book itself, or in your
yeah,
theory?
it's in the paper. If you can bring the paper up, that would actually be the best way to do it.
Let me do that. Let me try to see if we can do that. I'm going to go back to here.
Yeah, there we go.
All right, what page are we on? Probably.
All right. Let me zoom down. Page 24.
24. So let's go to 24. All right, so here we
There it is.
go. Let me now I can try to. Oh, okay. Let me see if I can zoom in on that.
Yeah, and you can see it right down bottom left. And on the right-hand side, figure 25 is the simulation of a black hole passing in front of a galaxy. And so that is what a gravitational lensing is going to look like on the right-hand side when something is curving space.
Oh, I can see it. Yeah, right.
Side, the curvature is there, not as strong, but it's still there.
Now I can see that. Hold on, let me add my cursor. Right here's the bend.
Yep, and it's stronger on the frame below.
How did you catch that? That's a good eye. That is a good eye. I would have never in my life got that. Let me actually even move it in more so people can see.
If you watch it in slow motion, I had to, even YouTube, you can't even
look at it right
see
here.
it on YouTube's.
Right there.
It jumps too many at a time. I downloaded it and I ran it through a video editing program where I could actually see it frame by frame. There's 30 frames per second. And I looked at each frame one after the other. And that's when you can see it. If you scroll down one more, there, it's really strong there.
Right. Wow. And then it goes back to.
And it goes back.
So why is this right here not versus this? Is that like when they actually like push the throttle?
No, it's the position as it's going through the. It's got to do with the shape of the actual spatial bend, and that was the next step. Once I identified these,
that is amazing.
If you go up to page 13,
okay. Let me move this over
and zoom out a little bit. This is what the spatial warp looks like around a UAP. So how I did this is I took the Alcubierre shape function. It's a calculus function he wrote in his paper, and it defines you input the angle, the distance, and what's called sigma, which defines the strength of the bend, and it tells you how much the point in space is pulled towards or pushed away from the center of the warp drive. And so what you see here is the overall shape of the spatial warp around the craft. And so you can see just horizontally underneath that UAP, that
Mm-hmm.
you can see the line is flat.
Right
Yeah,
here.
right there, it's flat. That's where it bounced back to normal. But if you look down further, everything's bending down a little bit, and that's where the lines of the background object bends and comes back up.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So
That's
this
pretty amazing.
matches the Aguila, that UAP video matches the math that is defined by um, Alcubierre. Now, if you go up to the next page above, I believe it's yeah, there's zoom out a little bit,
Okay.
so we can
Let
see
me
both images in there,
let me zoom out.
figure 8 and figure 9. So to understand what's going on, this little block, um, to to understand how gravity works, people don't really realize this, but it's a bend in space, kind of like a wedge shape. And so it's a lever effect on every molecule simultaneously in your body being pushed down towards the ground. So the Earth and other objects, it compresses space to itself, and then space farther away is expands more the farther away you get from the massive body in space. So the example is take a block of wood, drill 2 holes through it, fish some string, one through each hole, tie it to a doorknob. The doorknob represents a big body in space like the Earth. Pull the strings apart, and the block of wood will go towards the
Hmm.
doorknob.
Yeah.
That's how gravity works. The bend in space defines which direction an object will fall, and you're going to fall away from expanded space, and you're going to fall towards contracted space. And so if you go up to the next one above it, um, that is actually the direct output from the shape formula from the Alcubierre. Um, and what it found right off the bat was there's 2 downward pointing V's. Um, Now, in the Alcubierre um, uh, write-ups, he describes an expansion of space behind a craft and a contraction of space in front of the craft, causing a warp in space that would make the vehicle travel or fall forwards. Now, in this particular case, there's a disconnect. They're both showing downward pointing, which would mean
Mm-hmm.
it would actually go downwards instead of up. So I had to actually do a search, and I had to apply an elastic formula because space is elastic, and there's actually going to be a curve between the lower and the upper, and that's what you saw in the next page is the application of the elastic formula showing what an actual spatial curve looks like. Now, there's 3 arrows in here. Above, there's an arrow pointing down. You can see that the space is pointing down like this, which means anything above the craft is going to fall towards the UAP. And below it, below the craft, is another downward pointing V. So anything below the craft is going to fall away from the craft. And then in the middle is a nice, almost flat area where there's a bit of a curve, which anything inside that localized space will fall up or
Hmm.
forward. And so what that means is that there's a large diameter to small height ratio defining what can safely exist inside that warped space bubble. It is no accident that most UAPs of medium size that we've been witnessing are disc shaped. They're disc shaped because they have to be disc shaped. Any other shape that is too tall
Mm-hmm.
will cause the roof to collapse in or the bottom to fall out from underneath. It has to be this shape. Now, we've seen other ones, and it's described further below. And Luis Elizondo also described it in his paper or in his book triangles, tic
I was
tacs,
going to ask
cylinders.
about that. Cigar
Yeah,
triangles.
yeah. So That one is on, give me a sec here, I'll tell you which page that's on. I think it's further down towards the end. Yeah, it's page 50.
Oh, 50. Okay. I was a ways from there.
So basically what you're doing is you're using multiple warp drives uh, to work with these larger vehicles. So yeah, page 50.
There we go.
Maybe this next page.
Let's look. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, there you go. That's it right there. And so that's what it looks like in plan. That's what each one of these warp bubbles will look like. And if you scroll down a little bit in cross section, that's what the spatial warp is going to look like with 2 warp bubbles being used, or 2 warp drives. And then the next page shows 3.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So
that is pretty cool.
Basically, I had to expand on Alcubierre's warp system there, just to be able to show how the space actually is warped around a UAP and why the UAP are shaped the way they are. Now, in the case of the Aguadilla, it's a small round sphere about 3 to 5 feet in diameter. There's no occupants. It's obviously remote controlled. And so therefore they didn't use a disc shape. It's a semi-disc shape. It's oval, but it's not a really long disc shape.
Can I ask you this real quick before we move on to anything else? How close are we with our technology to get to their technology? Are we even close at all?
We're actually getting pretty close. Later in the paper, I described, or I mentioned, a study that was published in 2021.
Right.
It was a DARPA study. They were working on the Casimir effect, which is kind of like a 0-point energy theory. And what they discovered when they created these little micro bubbles, or micro toroids, was they had actually created a micro warp bubble system, not a simulation, but an actual micro warp drive about 4 micrometers across, like a billionth of an inch kind of in size. Very, very small. And so they proposed in their paper that their next step was going to be what they call daisy chaining these, putting several in a row to seeing what would happen. So I took Alcubierre's math and I actually applied it. What would it look like if you daisy chained a bunch of these together? And so that is, that's in the paper, and it's under, actually, where is it here? If you go to page 36.
I was going to say, I see 45 daisy chaining, but 30.
There's an intermediate step that I wanted to show.
Okay, 36.
To the daisy chaining. So on page 36, what's there is a UAP. I've shown red dots on the outer extremities of the UAP to represent the main ring, the main warp ring. And then underneath it in the center are 2 smaller warp rings. Each one of them, the orange and the blue, is a very small micro warp ring. And so what I found was when you turned on, in this case, the orange one, inside of the main larger one, you actually create an asymmetric shape to the warp bubble, which means that gives you flight control capabilities. It expands space a little bit more on one side than the other, causing a tilt, and you need at least 3 of these in the craft, so you can have a left, right, and a front, up, down, and that'll give you the ability to control the pitch, yaw, maneuvering, things like that. And so here I was able to show that, if you nest them, they do positively impact each other. And so when I read that paper on the micro warp bubbles, I took this that example, and if you go down to page 45, you can see their actual screen images of their actual paper, um, showing. Yeah, there it is. On the left uh, is their warp bubble. In the middle is the Alcubierre warp bubble, and on the right hand side is their proposed daisy chaining.
Hmm.
And so you scroll to the next page. Now, this is the mathematical result of what happens when you add multiple daisy chained warp bubbles all in one. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, all up to 5. And so the more you add, the stronger the they do. Yeah. So the more you add, the stronger the width is, but the slope goes down. So what that basically means is the more you add, the longer your warp bubble is going to be, or the taller your warp bubble is going to be. But because the slope goes down, it means it's going to be an overall weaker warp bubble.
Right.
Now, that sounds bad, but it's actually good, because if you go to the next page after that, and if you create a cone shape where you have multiple concentric rings creating a large cone, that cone defines the height, and then the length of the cone defines the height. The width of the cone defines the strength or the throttle. So the more of those concentric rings they turn on, the
Right.
stronger the gravitational acceleration will be, meaning the result is you can have full throttle control using this warp system. Now, the only thing that I can't say to this is they didn't publish how much energy they put into these micro warp bubbles, and then they didn't publish how much acceleration they were finding with the micro warp bubbles. And I think that was intentional, so as not to give away information to the United States enemies,
Right.
Russia, China, etc., foreign adversaries. Now, and I didn't try to figure that out because I don't want to give that information away either. But what I did show here is daisy chaining does work. And if you daisy chain it into a concentric cone, you can then easily apply throttle control, which means you can have a vehicle that can hover, it can raise slightly, it can lower slightly, or it can accelerate at a very fast pace.
Wow. This is pretty fascinating. I mean, this is really fascinating, because I have to say, a lot of people, when they come on the show, they are experiencers, but they don't have the scientific background to explain it and to make people understand it. So this is amazing. And people in the chat room, if you guys want to ask a question for Chad, please ask a question. I'd love to answer or get an answer from him if you guys have a question about what he's talking about. And with this theory, I know we're going to talk more about it, but this theory, if people want to get a copy of this, how can they, get a copy so they can start doing their own research?
It's on MUFON Canada's website, mufoncanada.com, and then go to the news section. You can download it from there.
Wow. And I'm not good with this pronunciation. Alcubierre's warp field theory.
I have to apologize to Dr. Alcubierre. Apparently, I'm not pronouncing it correctly either.
Oh, okay. Because I was like, okay, I'm gonna try, but. Can you talk a little bit, because there's a lot of people that are very unfamiliar. I'm unfamiliar. I've heard of it, but I don't know much about it. How does this relate to the concept of warp bubbles in your research?
Okay. So Alcubierre had defined the first mathematical formula for how to shape a warp bubble for gravitational acceleration.
Right.
His math basically said that you'd use one very large ring, and you'd need basically the equivalent of a Jupiter mass nuclear reactor to power it. with a single ring. Now, others have come along and they've done math as well, and they've got
Right.
the math down from Jupiter size to planet size. To some of them are. It's getting closer and closer in reality as to how much energy needs to go in. Sometimes it's with negative energy, sometimes it's without negative energy. But like I said, with the microwarp bubble accidental discovery, it's now within reach theoretically. So it's no longer, well, we don't have the ability to create that much power.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's looking very plausible right now. Um, if they could create a microwarp bubble at a billionth of an inch in size, and they can daisy chain it together, you can make one. Chances are you're going to need a portable nuclear reactor, no
Right.
matter what. There's no, even when you get out of space, there's no oxygen to burn gasoline with, so you have to do it no matter what.
So, a lot of people that, especially in the UFO community, and they do research, like you said, you don't even want to show a lot of the results because you don't want our adversaries to pick it up. When you're touching on a subject like this, how safe do you feel? Because a lot of people have gone beyond of what government and scientists like sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
How far do you feel that you went that kept you safe enough to to not have them come and say you need to slow down a little bit?
Um, that's a good question. I had written this up. I had run this through MUFON USA. Had them do a peer review. The first half actually was sent out for peer review.
Mm-hmm.
I got some comments back and stuff, but I hadn't had this last part, the daisy chaining, in there.
Oh,
So
wow.
this is new. I added it in, and after discussing it internally within MUFON Canada, we decided that we were going to put it out um, as is. I've basically shown everything that I've learned in here. I feel safe. No one's going to come bugging me
Right.
for more information because I don't have any more information to
Right.
give.
Right.
You got to go talk to those DARPA scientists to find out about the power levels and exactly how they built those little micro warp bubbles.
Have there been any like universities, institutes, or experts that have wanted to collaborate with you or on this?
No, this was released in November, early November. So um, we've sent some press releases out and stuff like that, but I really haven't gotten much responses. Everybody's been so focused on the congressional and Senate hearings um, that that there wasn't much. Now, it brings up another point. Now, Dr. Villaroo, she's a European scientist who spoke at the Seoul conference last year. And I remember her being interviewed, and she said that her paper, she couldn't even get it peer reviewed.
Hmm.
Every place
Really?
she sent it rejected it just because of the topic. There is a huge stigma into researching this stuff. And so it takes a few brave people to look at this stuff and go, you know what, there is merit to this. There is validity to this. There's math that works for this. Now that I've got this out, um, unfortunately, it's not. MUFON Canada and MUFON are not peer-reviewed journals to the same extent as like Nature and things like that. Um, like I said, it did go through peer review, but most UFO papers, you, they've not been able to get them peer reviewed. So I'm hoping that once the word gets out, that other scientists will look at this and go, um, "There's something here to be studied. There's something here that we can see. It's not our imagination. It's real. It meets and matches Einstein's physics, the
Right.
Alcubierre physics. This it actually does validate Louis Elizondo's book. There's an interesting statement in Louise's book, Louise's book, and it's let me get the quote here for you. March 1988, Coast Guard team summoned to investigate a large object and other smaller lights spotted by a family along Lake Erie, watching as the parent object appeared to descend close to the lake ice, causing it to rumble and crack. The smaller lights, which resembled triangles, lingered nearby. Shortly after, the large object seemed to land on the ice. Smaller objects zipped inside it, and they later disappeared. The ice below seemed to heave and crack under an invisible weight. Was it due to something physical? They didn't know. Even Louise Elizondo didn't know. But remember, I pointed out that there's a downward force in the bottom of that warp bubble. If you were to hover over lake ice, it's going to experience a downward gravitational force greater than normal, and it would break that ice up.
I was going to say, if it wasn't ice, would it create ripples?
It quite possibly could. It's interesting. People have described seeing UAPs enter the water without hardly any splashes.
I've heard that too. That's why I was asking if, yeah.
And so basically what's going on is the water's feeling the acceleration from that warp. And so that's why it's not splashing, is it's kind of just getting pushed aside as the UAP is settling through it.
Because I remember when I was a kid, I hate to tell this story again because they've heard it a million times, but when my mom, my brother, my two sisters, and I in the 70s saw a UFO hovering over a lake. My mom said there's no sound. It was a disc shape. There were some lights, but she said there was no movement anywhere on the lake or wind or anything like that. So I was curious to see your thoughts on that, because when it comes to water, that's pretty interesting. And one thing I do want to ask, because I found this fascinating. I'm going to show this picture. You talked about a black hole. Now, is this compulsion? Is it creating the black hole? And is this? I'm curious about this because for what we say is a black hole is pretty dangerous to be in.
So the reason why I showed that in the paper was it's an example simulation of what gravitational lensing looks like around a strong curvature of space.
Oh God, okay.
Yeah. So I described there was a photograph from 1919 to test Einstein's theory. Basically, some astronomers went to South America and Africa, I believe it was, to take photos of the sun. And what they found was that there were stars around the sun that were farther away from the sun than they should have been. And that was gravitational lensing. So instead of the sun's light coming through here, it was coming up and then bending back down, making it look farther away than it really was. And so,
but don't they even regular airlines, instead of going in a straight line, sometimes they go kind of the curvature of the?
Yeah, that's the curvature of the Earth. When you look at a flat map, you're taking a round object and you're trying to flatten it.
Right.
And so southern areas are smaller. Northern areas look much larger than they really are. But when you're trying to fly I'll give you an example. If you're trying to fly from New York to Europe, you'd think, okay, you're going to fly horizontally across the Atlantic.
You're like,
but no, what they do is they fly north across the Arctic this way and back.
It's faster.
And so that's what's going on when you look at airplane flights.
Wow. There are some people chatting in the chat room. I do want to read the craziest one thing I've seen, and you can see in the video on Backyard Professor, somewhere in the UAP, like warping, blinking, and quantum leaping. There is a hardest behavior by far to explain I've witnessed. So a lot of people have kind of seen, so many of these different types of UFOs and experienced these. Like you said, when it comes to the size of craft. The question always comes back to, and I've even talked to Navajo tribe member, and they said they used to see craft over the mountains, and they could actually see inside the craft itself and saw creatures. So many of the questions is how do these findings that you're suggesting, the operators of these UAPs, what is your take on? Are they human, extraterrestrials, or something entirely different than what we're expecting?
That's a really good question, and it brings up another point. In my paper, I was explicit to state that this paper describes the effect of the warp drive.
Mm-hmm.
It cannot describe who the operators are. I cannot tell you if they're Russian, Chinese,
right,
extraterrestrials, interdimensionals. Can't do that. That's a different study. I think and at the very end of the paper, in the conclusion, I say something to the effect of this shows that these vehicles are using an Alcubierre warp drive system. The next step is for scientists to give themselves permission to study who's inside them, who's inside these objects.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't do that with a telescope or radar instruments, anything. You cannot study who's inside without talking to those who've been inside.
Do you think we're like Elon Musk is talking about wanting to go to Mars, and and all other agencies want to go to Mars? Do you feel like we should wait until we get the next level of this before we start traveling that distance to other planets and other galaxies, and instead of, because
it would be nice to wait, but I've been watching, there's been developments where with nuclear propulsion or other types of propulsion, we can decrease the length of time from 2 years to a month to get there, getting up to about a tenth the speed of light to get there and back. So if we get those technologies going, then it would be safe and timely to get to Mars and back. But if you're doing it purely on chemical propulsion, there's no point.
Right.
It's just too long, too dangerous.
Do you feel like what you're talking about with your theory, they also, when it comes to the like wormholes, moving, through these type of holes to go to different galaxies, and because I think that's how we're like, how are they going billions of miles across the universe and getting here so easily? Do you feel like
space folding or wormholes? I did not specifically look at any of that stuff.
Right.
It wouldn't surprise me with some kind of a configuration of daisy chaining. You could probably fold space in and on itself, and but I did not look at it, and I didn't want to go there at this time. I think it's just appropriate to show people that Alcubierre was correct, and that somebody is using an Alcubierre drive. And one of the things I wrote in there was, and I know a lot of people, maybe not your listeners, but a lot of people will say, you got to prove it. You've got to show exactly how it works, how much power is going to go in there, how much, this and that and this. They're going to want everything. And in astronomy, there's a lot of stuff we know and we don't know. There's known unknowns. So we know how gravity works by bending space, but we don't know how large bodies in space bend the spatial structure. We don't know how it does. We know there's dark energy. We know there's dark matter. We have evidence of them, but we don't know what they are. There's an alternate one called dark flow, which explains it differently. Instead of energy and matter, it's just a kind of an energy. Basically, what it comes down to is, in astronomy, if you discover something and you don't know how it works, you prefix it with the word dark. So there's dark energy, dark matter. In this particular case, I've shown that these UAP objects are warping space exactly as how Alcubierre predicted they would be, but we don't know exactly how they are able to do it with and how much energy. So I'm suggesting that we call these dark Alcubierre warp drives because we don't know exactly how they work. We can see how it works. We can see the spatial warping. We just don't know exactly how it works. So therefore, it should be called a dark Alcubierre warp drive.
Wow. Well, I appreciate you doing this and coming on the show. And what's next for the research? Are there any areas within the study that you think need like a deeper investigation, or
Yeah,
even what?
there's two more papers I'm working on.
Mm-hmm.
So during the Senate hearing, um, the new leader of Aero did a presentation on the Aguadilla UAP video, and they basically said it was a balloon or a sky lantern, and it changed its temperature to make it look like it went in the water. And so I sent you a bunch of photographs.
Yeah, yeah. I'd love
There's
to show some of those. Which?
yeah, it doesn't matter which ones. There's color and infrared or FLIR videos. Um, and so just pick two
Well,
that are,
here's the balloons, the
yeah.
latex balloons color.
So these are latex balloons. This is what they look like to the human eye in the color. If you go to the next one, you'll actually see that latex balloons are basically 99% transparent to infrared. So keep going to another one.
Let's see.
There we go. That same balloon is almost entirely invisible other than it's bending the infrared light a little bit. So when they said that the Alcubierre UAP was a balloon, if it was a latex balloon, the IR camera would not have been able to see it. And there's another one there from Mick West had actually done one. Yeah, here's a good one. This is it here in black. You can see through the latex on the left, and on the right is a Mylar balloon. Mylar doesn't, it's opposite. It actually reflects infrared light, almost perfect mirror. And then, so if it was a Mylar balloon, it would actually have been bright white instead of a dark color. Yeah, so these are latex balloons that are transparent. Keep going.
Let me see if
There, the debunker Mick West had done a video where he had taken a Mylar. Here, this is it here. So he's taken a Mylar balloon on the left with a normal camera, and on the right is a FLIR camera, and you can see what's going on here is the Mylar balloon is actually reflecting light from the sky, which is quite cold compared to the background. So if the Aguadilla UAP was a Mylar balloon, it would have been bright white, not the dark image that you see in the videos. And then the bottom side of it is reflecting the ground, which is why it looks long and narrow instead of circular, because it's reflecting the color of the ground up and it's blending into the ground. So for them to say that this was some kind of party balloon,
going 80 miles an hour.
They absolutely they fell prey to I can remember the proper term. It's confirmation bias. That's it. Confirmation bias. Oh, well, if we just explain this as we think it's, a balloon over the airport and you point it over here and yeah, it looks like with the perspective like something far away moving fast. Yeah, that explains it. But they didn't look at what do party balloons look like in an IR camera? And they look nothing like what's in the Aguadilla craft or the Aguadilla video. And then the other one he said was maybe it's a Chinese lantern. Well, a Chinese lantern is a tall, very bright cylinder. There it is. There's one here. This is Mick West again. He's simulated what a sky lantern looks like. It would be a solid, bright. This one is white is hot, but if it was flipped for black is hot, it would be a very black object that was a tall cylinder. And so the Aguadilla UAP isn't a tall cylinder. It's a squashed oval. And so what's seen in the Aguadilla video, oh, this is a great one here. Um, so what's going on here is on the right hand side, you can see the UAP and then it dims out. It's actually traveling behind a couple of trees. And that's why it went from dark. And this one here is where it all disappears. You can see it getting lighter and lighter as it's hidden behind the trees, and then it brightens up again as it leaves on the left hand side.
Wow.
So this shows that the Aguadilla UAP was actually very far away and it was passing behind objects um, on the far side of the airport instead of over top of the airport, which means that the object was traveling at about 100 kilometers an hour, that it was
Wow.
about 3 to 5 feet in size, and it was not a party balloon. And so you add all that up together, and you've got an object using a dark Alcubierre warp drive system.
For someone that, put this together, and what did you find like most compelling or surprising about this connection between UAPs and the...
Okay, the one that was the most surprising was actually if you go back to the paper,
Yep.
and it's going to be page 15. It took me 2 weeks to do this. I did a spatial compression color map showing, um, you know, before what I showed you was basically a wine decanter shape of the space of the warp, but they call it a bubble, and it's a bubble shape. And so what's going on when you get page 15, which is figure 12 up, you can see here um, uh, yellow and red are spatial expansions, and purple and magenta are spatial contractions. And so what I found interesting was that just above the UAP, there's a very tight spatial contraction. And in this calculation, that very small magenta section is about 1% of the normal spatial. So imagine this, an object is traveling at 100 kilometers an hour. The air is suddenly finding itself inside a smaller space. So think of it this way. What happens if 1 cubic foot of air suddenly finds itself inside of 10 cubic feet of space?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get I can't remember the pronunciation, but it's a rapid decompression causing rapid cooling, and if there's enough humidity, you'll see a cloud form called a vapor cone. And so if you go down to the next one is page, one second here. There it is. Page 32. There we go. So on the upper right is a vapor cone around a jet fighter. It's towards the tail end, but on the left hand and below it, you can see there's a vapor cone above the UAP, the Aguadilla UAP, in 3 different spots. And there's other spots that's there as well. That correlates with that spatial compression I was describing to you.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, as it's passing through the air, that spatial contraction is causing the air to form a vapor cone above the UAP, which is what you're seeing here in the infrared. As white, it's very cold. And so this is a secondary atmospheric phenomenon that can be seen using an IR camera as a true UAP, true Alcubierre warp drive is passing by, cooling the air in front or above it.
Wow.
And then there was another video I'd found, and it's go to page 33.
33.
And it's lower right. Keep going. All right, so this video was taken from an aircraft. I don't know where it was filmed, but it was zipping, it was moving back and forth, approaching the airplane, and then suddenly it took off at a very high rate of speed to the upper right on a horizontal plane. And in the last two frames, you can see there's a vapor cone in front of it as it departs to the upper right. That is a one-to-one correlation with that spatial compression image I showed you earlier.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Where was this taken at?
I don't know where this
okay,
one was.
okay.
They never said. If you go to the next page, you can see, there it is there, the magenta spatial compression in front of the UAP. It's a one-to-one. That video not only showed that spatial compression as it departed, but it also shows background blurring of objects underneath it as it's passing over them.
This is pretty amazing. And I have to say, I'm going to have you come back, and we have, I'm sure, more discussions about this, because this is really fascinating. And I think a lot of people, like you said, appreciate you bringing this to our knowledge. And once again, you can go to MUFONCanada.com. If you can, join it and get more information like this in the future. And Chad, how long have you been with MUFON?
About 10 years.
A long time.
Yeah. I actually had contacted them back in the early 90s as an experiencer. And then I joined, went to several MUFON conferences and met Kathleen Martin, who's the leader of the experiencer research team or resource team. And she convinced me to join. So I joined up with MUFON, and I joined up with the experiencer resource team.
That's great.
But I took a leave of absence from that to write my book, which is Missing Time 2, Ordinary Man's Extraordinary Journey. It's almost done, just going through the last stages of editing, and then we'll have it out on Amazon.
2025?
So in a few months, we'll have it up.
Perfect. Well, then maybe you'll have to come back, and once it's launched, we'll have you back on.
Perfect. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, Chad, thank you so much. Can people follow you besides on MUFON website? Do you have like a website of yourself or Instagram?
True-experiences.ca is my website I set up for the book.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, Chad. Thank you, MUFON Canada. We love what you guys do. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. You guys had a lot of conversations in the chat room, and I'm sure really love to have Chad back. But you can watch Truth Be Told right here every Friday. We have a great guest next week and all through December, so make sure you tune in live and ask questions in the chat room. On Mondays, you have Robert Hensley with Minuteman Report, and on Wednesdays, you have Bonnie Burkert with Truth Be Told Transformation, all the spiritual side that you need to get through the week. We'd love to share that with you, and please subscribe, share, and leave amazing comments. Listen to our podcast on Apple, iHeart, Spotify, all those places, and we'd really appreciate the good comments. But until next time, I'm Tony Sweet, and